Okay, so today I have the very easy task of introducing our colleague Andy that was with us from 2015 to 2019. You know, I think all of us have these sort of criteria in mind of what makes for a great scholar, don't we? And so great scholars, they investigate interesting and relevant topics. Andy researches decision-making, mindfulness, and other interesting and relevant topics. They publish a lot and they publish on top journals. Andy does well. They are great teachers. Andy has plenty of teaching awards, including from our school. And Andy was also chosen as the 40 top best professors younger than 40 years of age in the world. They do service. They are great colleagues. Andy will help anybody who might need help, and I can speak from experience. They get grants and they get awards and they get recognitions. Andy is here because he got the prestigious and competitive Fulbright Award that he's here in Portugal for 3 months or so. Andy left, but he's here very often, and I think he misses us. But we miss you too, and we're very happy that you took the time to be here. Thank you for making the time. And what's yours, my friend?
Thanks so much, Wilson.
Thanks.
Oh, geez. How do I follow that? Okay. Yeah, I do miss you, and it's really enjoyed to be back. And I'm going to talk about some of the research I've been doing. I'm going to overview kind of this research program that I started in my dissertation. I recently got Portuguese citizenship, so hope to be here more often to deepen that connection even further. Okay, so I was born in Washington State in the United States in the northwest corner, moved when I was 3 years old to the Seattle area, was there until high school when I went to undergrad at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, where my major was decision science. I also minored in opera singing. I took 7 years of opera lessons. Then I studied abroad in the last year of undergrad, studying acting at the Moscow Art Theater School, founded by Stanislavski in Moscow, Russia, for 3 months, and then studying Italian in Rome for another 3 months. And I was shocked by how different the people were in these other countries compared to the Americans I knew in my home culture. And so I wanted to be a cultural psychologist. I wanted to go study the differences and how people think across cultures. And I also watched Michael Moore's Sicko documentary about how horrible the American healthcare system is. And I told my mother later that day, I'm going to move to France. And she's like, sure you are, Andy. But I got into the PhD program at INSEAD and moved to France. She's like, okay, I guess I shouldn't doubt you with your weird ideas. So I went there for a year and got tired of the forest of Fontainebleau and moved to Singapore for the next 4 years. And I spent the rest of the PhD program in Singapore, except for 8 months when I was studying abroad, ironically, in my home country at the Wharton School. And then most of that research was about mindfulness. I wanted to use their laboratory. They have an amazing behavioral lab where there are 6 full-time employees at all times running your studies for you. You send them a Qualtrics link and it just fills up magically. And so I'm going to talk a lot about mindfulness. My other research stream actually continues to be about cultural psychology. The paper I'm most proud about in that topic is about how if you have a close romantic or friendship relationship with someone from another culture, it makes you more creative, entrepreneurial, and innovative. I take my research really seriously, so I married a foreigner in June of 2015. My wife, Kiso, and I were married in Seoul, South Korea. Then I started my job here at Catolica as an assistant professor in 2015. My son Angelo was born in Maternidade Alfredo da Costa in Lisbon in June of 2016. So here he is, really enjoying his trip so far. I'll make some enemies with this flight, I'm sure, but I'll solidify some friendships as well. And so then I moved back to Seattle, where I'm from, when I got the job in 2019 at the University of Washington's Foster School of Business, just in time for the pandemic. And then my daughter Leah was born in October 2022. She's like 12 hours old in this picture. This is her Baekgyo, which in Korean culture is when you celebrate a child being alive for 100 days. She's also enjoying her trip here, also wearing red, but mostly at the Little Gym das Laranjeiras and the Jardim Zoológico de Lisboa. They let me run a study tour with one of our colleagues' husbands. So I took 28 MBA students from Seattle on a 12-day study tour to Portugal. We started in Porto, then we went to Douro Valley, then we went to Ilha Boa Aveiro, then we ended in Lisbon in March of last year. It was kind of just like a really drunk summer camp that they somehow let me run. I don't know how I got away with this, but this was a lot of fun. They also let me teach in Rome last summer. So anyway, my life's been really good lately. That's kind of my story. And so what I'm going to talk about today, research-wise, is all on this topic of mindfulness meditation and how it can be used on the spot as a workplace intervention. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the background about mindfulness and why I wanted to study it in this way. I'm going to talk about my dissertation and some of the trials and tribulations that have gone along with this research program. In general, I'm going to talk about a current project. It's a field experiment, and I'm going to close with a couple slides of cautionary tales. So I hope that you can learn from my mistakes instead of making all the mistakes on your own. Okay, so what is mindfulness and meditation? Mindfulness came from the Pali-Canada Theravada Buddhism over 2,000 years ago in India, and it was a combination of two things. It was philosophical considerations about how to be a good person, what's the right thing to do, how you should be aware of the downstream outcomes of your behaviors, and mental training exercises or meditations, which were meant to support the philosophical considerations. It was a package. Then, about 60 years ago, American contemplatives like John Kabat-Zinn, Mirabai Bush, Jack Kornfield wanted to bring mindfulness to the West, but they knew that Americans weren't looking for a new religion. So what they did is they had to secularize it. They had to take away the things that felt religious. So they took away the guru worship. They took away the robes that the meditation teacher would be wearing and put them in normal Western clothing. They took away the hand mudra decorations, and they massively toned down the philosophical considerations. So now, if you see people doing a meditation course class at the World Economic Forum, the person teaching that course is not telling them to be a good person. They're not telling them, oh, here's how you should live your life, the philosophies of treating every sentient being with loving kindness, or metta. They're really just using the physiological effects of focusing on your breathing or other, usually body awareness type meditations to reduce negative emotions, reduce how stressed people feel, and then they're going to go off and be bankers just like they would have been bankers. So here's a really famous neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin named Richard Davidson, and he admits that the research is critical to the popularization of mindfulness. He says there's a swath of our culture who's not going to listen to someone in monk's robes, but they're paying attention to scientific evidence. So what's mindfulness? What's meditation in terms of definitions? Mindfulness is a state of non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, and mindfulness meditation is focusing on the physical sensations of breathing or walking or eating or noticing your thoughts and emotions as they arise in the present moment, but from a more observant or detached perspective. So a mindful way of looking at it would be, I notice I'm feeling anger right now, where you're separate from the anger. A less mindful thing would say, I'm angry. It's who I am. I identify with it. It's just an objective truth. And so mindfulness meditation is thought to be a means to an end. If you want to get into a state of mindfulness, you use the meditation to put yourself into that psychological state. But it's not the only way you can get into that state. So you might organically be mindful when you're walking around town. You're really not aware of the present moment, aware of the world around you in a non-judgmental way. If you have your smartphone open on your desk, that's going to make it less likely that you're going to spontaneously be mindful. There's not much research looking at mindfulness separate from meditation, but the best study that has so far was Reina and Kudazia 2020 OBHDP, and they found that having a screen near you reduces spontaneous mindfulness, and having high conscientiousness goals. Like if you're someone who really cares about being conscientious, you're more likely to have more moments of mindfulness spontaneously separate from meditation.
And sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what's the difference between mindfulness meditation and simple meditation? Is there
So meditation is an umbrella term that means any intentional focus of attention. And so, for example, there are other forms of meditation where you have a mantra, where you're not focusing on your breath, you're just repeating the same 2-syllable mantra, and it's hard to run a study with that one because you need to go to a monastery and go through this like week-long thing before they tell you there's your secret 2-syllable thing that you're not supposed to tell anyone. So you can't really run an experiment saying, oh, you do this, you do that, because you have to go through it. So that would be like transcendental meditation. But I mean, a body awareness would be not just breath, it'd be thinking about different ones. Loving kindness meditation is you're imagining sending love and kindness or well wishes to yourself and to your friends or family, to your enemies, to the whole world, in these outward moving concentric circles. And so mindfulness is a specific form of meditation, and it's a psychological state that you get put into by that specific form of meditation. I've also found in other studies that loving kindness meditation also puts people into a state of mindfulness, even though it's not the breath focus. But does that answer your question?
Yeah. Just understand.
Great question. Thank you. So lots of companies, most Fortune 500 companies at this point have had some kind of program for mindfulness for their employees. Some of them don't still have them, so they tried it, they don't have it anymore, but most of them have had it at some point. And there are very successful mindfulness apps. The Headspace app for a while was getting 12 million new signups every month. The Calm app has been valued at $2 billion, which is a lot of money for an app that's not even the best app, but it's valued by a lot. There's a company called the Potential Project where the only thing they do is go into companies and teach corporate mindfulness trainings. And they have offices in 26 different countries. So it's not really much of a stretch to say that mindfulness has become the main way that companies tell their employees to deal with their stress. It's become like pretty much the main advice, the go-to kind of tool. If you're stressed, the first suggestion that they're kind of institutionalizing into the organization. You could also step back from that and be like, well, why did that show up so fast? And my guess is that if you're the CEO or you're an executive, you like to feel like, oh, I've done something to check the box. So if I've given you a tool to fix your stress issues, then I've done something. And if you're still stressed, it's not my fault for overworking you. It's not my fault for creating a kind of a frustrating job environment. It's your fault because you're not using this meditation tool enough. So there can be a little bit of it's not all, rainbows and candy canes, but it is very popular. So my research question for the past 13 years now has been when and why is a state of mindfulness helpful or harmful for outcomes that can matter for people in the workplace? And that's been largely because this is a game of doing new stuff. And most of the other people were looking at trait mindfulness, which is how much are you mindful in general, even when you're not meditating. And it takes a lot of time and effort to increase people's trait mindfulness. You probably have to meditate 45 minutes every day or 6 days a week for like 8 weeks before you're going to move the needle on how mindful people are in general by changing their psychological trait to be higher in trait mindfulness. And so I saw some of these studies where people would meditate for only 15 minutes or as little as 8 minutes, and that can induce this temporary, shorter state form of mindfulness. But I thought, well, what would happen if we just ask people to meditate for 8 to 15 minutes when they really need it, when they're really stressed out, when they're about to have a difficult conversation, in some specific situation on the spot where it's not something they're doing every day, it's something they do just when it's needed. So you could get some benefits topically without as much of a cost in terms of time and effort. And the metaphor that I'm trying to popularize or encourage people to consider is that you have a headache, so you take an aspirin. So this on-the-spot meditation is like you realize that you're really stressed, you meditate in that situation. And this is in contrast to the muscle metaphor, which is actually much more popular than this right now. The muscle metaphor, you hear mindfulness teachers talk about or proponents talk about where you're supposed to meditate every day for 45 minutes, like you're going to the gym to build a physical muscle. And so that's kind of the metaphorical justification for how you need to do all of this meditation to increase your trait, is because it's just like you're going to the gym. People have a mental model for what it means to go to the gym and how there are benefits related to it. So they use that metaphor to encourage people to meditate as often as they say they need to. So I want to take you back to INSEAD Singapore, November 2013. It's conference room looks like this. I look like this. So that was my visa for Singapore. Thankfully, I can afford haircuts. at this point. And so I wanted to do a 5-chapter dissertation, which in retrospect was just me kind of trying to overachieve in kind of dysfunctional ways. But my dissertation committee intelligently negotiated me down to a 4-chapter dissertation. But in the back of my mind, I kind of had this chip on my shoulder where I was like, oh, I should try to publish all 5 of these projects, even though one of them's not technically in it. So I kind of set myself up with this plan. I want to work on these 5 different projects. This is kind of the albatross around my neck. So the first one was about how mindfulness can make people make better decisions by reducing the sunk cost bias or increasing resistance to the sunk cost bias. In the first study I ran, we randomly assigned people to either listen to a focused breathing guided meditation recording where a professional mindfulness coach's voice tells them, focus on the physical sensations of breathing. If your mind wanders away from the breath, don't judge yourself, just bring attention back to the breath. So you get like instructions to do this and reminders every minute for 8 to 15 minutes. And so we had a 15-minute recording. We hired a mindfulness coach to make this recording. And then there was a control condition where the same voice, the same professional mindfulness coach told them, let your mind wander as it normally would. And this is a control condition because it's not really a form of meditation, but it's an effective control condition because it's the same voice. They're saying about the same number of words at the same intervals. It's also a recording. So it's very high in internal validity as a contrast to the mindfulness recording, but it's just not mindfulness. It's like the one thing that's missing is it's not the meditation. And so we randomly assigned people to listen to one of those 2 recordings. And at that time, like many of you, I read Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I said, well, if system 2 thinking is slower than system 1 thinking and better, and meditation makes people think slowly, I bet meditation is going to make all kinds of decisions better. It's going to reduce these 3 bad things and improve these 2 good things. And it's just going to be a magic wand. And that was not true. We only got 1 significant effect. All the rest, we got null effects. There was no significant effect. And so we took a step back. We're like, well, why is that? Why is that the one that works? And what we came up with is that mindfulness meditation puts your focus on the present moment because your breath is something that's happening. It's a tactile sensation that's present moment. And that reduces how much you're thinking about the past and the future. And because most of our concerns, most of the things that make us feel negative emotions are either ruminations that we're replaying in our mind from the past or worries about how things are going to play out in the future, catastrophizing, being anxious about stuff that mostly won't actually happen. So if you reduce how much you're focused on the past and the future, you tend to, on average, feel less negative emotions. And because people were feeling less negative emotions, they were able to make a clear decision in the present moment and reduce the sunk cost bias as a result. So this is what we found in a follow-up study, which was the last study in that paper. This worked like empirically. And we published this article in February 2014 in Psychological Science, which was kind of a career mistake because I didn't realize that many management departments don't consider this a top journal. At INSEAD, we had so many like social psychologists around that they thought this was great and they didn't tell me that others didn't. But in any case, this is where we published it. And this was the Time magazine cover story that same month that we published this, which was the mindful revolution, all the benefits that people are going to have from these long-term mindfulness programs. And so we couldn't have struck it better in terms of how our research came out at the high watermark of interest about mindfulness, at least in America. So we got 50 different press articles about our one research article on every continent except Antarctica. Including 5 separate press articles in the Huffington Post alone. 2 of them were the French version, but they were still the Huffington Post. So five different articles in the same outlet. Okay, the next thing I did was I wrote this theory paper. Because
what about no results? No results were published in
you don't publish no results.
Yes, I know.
No. But I mean, if someone ever wants to get the data, I'd share it with them because I mean, there's just no functional outlet where you can like, it'd be nice if there was a database of null results so that we just didn't all go down these like dead ends that we don't know about, that someone else already went down that dead end. So I mean, that would be nice. I just don't know how that can be done at the moment. So I went to Wharton, as I mentioned, as a PhD student, and I presented the main like on-the-spot mindfulness idea about my dissertation. And Justin Berg was a PhD student at the time, and he's a really smart guy who got a job at Stanford, and now he's moving to Michigan. And he said, you should write a theory paper. And I thought, well, if Justin Berg says I should write a theory paper, I should write a theory paper. So I did, and I made a model that was way too complicated, and it got rejected in 11 journals until finally getting into the Journal of Business Research, which is like a B marketing journal. So my main takeaway was don't write theory papers. Okay, third one was mindfulness, reducing task motivation. So what we did on this one is we randomly assigned people to the meditation recording or to a control condition task. And then we gave them tasks to do, which were kind of these kind of meaningless, stupid laboratory tasks that we see a lot in JPSP type articles, like anagram word puzzles, where you're rearranging the letters in a word or phrase to make a new word or phrase. And so the first thing we did was we gave them the task. We said, you're going to do these anagram word puzzles. And we asked so they meditated, and then we gave them the task. And then we said, how motivated are you to do this task? And they answered on like 2 to 5 different items. I'm this motivated. I want to spend this much time on it, whatever. And then they actually did the task. And if you had been reading BuzzFeed articles about how mindfulness is going to change your life, 20 ways it's going to make your life better, you probably would expect mindfulness to increase their motivation to do tasks, because motivation is good, mindfulness is good, and increase their performance, because we care about performance. And we got neither of those effects. We actually got a reduction in motivation. People who just meditated said, I'm less motivated to do these stupid tasks. And then there was no effect at all on performance, which is weird in itself, because usually you increase performance, you increase motivation, you increase performance. They're usually very closely tied together. And so we had to take a step back. We're like, well, why are these not hanging together like they normally would? And what we came up with was that there is this normal pathway that you'd expect of mindfulness making people calmer, reducing their motivation, and partially pulling down task performance. But there's also this second pathway where mindfulness, even though it makes them less motivated, it does make them better at focusing on the task without getting distracted. So even though their motivation goes down, in some sense, their ability goes up. And so this increase in task focus partially pulled up task performance, motivation pulling it down, task focus pulling it up. These two cancel each other out. So this is why, even though mindfulness reduces motivation, it had no total effect on task performance. So Kathleen Voss and I published this in Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes in July of 2018. And because she's kind of a celebrity, she got us an op-ed in the New York Times, which was awesome at getting our research out to a lot of people. But 295 people hated it in terms of the comment section. The most extreme of which was this person saying Kathleen Voss and Andrew Hafenbrack are behavioral Mengelaists, which is likening us to a Nazi doctor who mutilated people, which I don't think we're similar to, but hey. And so then Arianna Huffington, Richard Davidson, that guy, wrote an article criticizing our research called "Don't Buy into the Backlash. The Science on Meditation is Clear. One flawed study can't diminish the benefits of meditation in the workplace." We had 15 studies, so if they're flawed, it's not one flawed study. And I mean, I found that there are several other flaws in their logic, but that didn't matter because their article got shared by Deepak Chopra, Phil Jackson, the coach of the Lakers and Bulls. This was the only thing he tweeted in a 5-year period. So I like to think I'm like living rent-free in Phil Jackson's mind. And then Arianna Huffington tweeted at me to make sure I would see it, which was nice of her. Okay, so then that brings me to mindfulness reducing guilt and pro-social reparation. So I had this other article on how mindfulness makes people more generous, and that was in 2020. Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, but on that idea, so how do you deal with that type of argument, which in fact is saying that mindfulness as a concept is actually more similar to an ideology or a religion?
Yes.
And in that sense, it will be part of the value system of your readers,
yes,
and of yourself,
right?
And in that case, it's your readers, and of course, they will react as they react to any ideology, to any program that they feel is essentially a justification of a certain,
yes,
or a rationalization of a certain ideology or religion, if you want to.
Right. Yeah. And so that there are a couple of answers I have to that. One is that it's ironic that the people who like mindfulness if you criticize mindfulness, do not react in a mindful way. They react in a very kind of angry, amygdala hijacking, we would say, type of way. But yeah, it is an ideology. And so we were talking at lunch about Davis, 1971, where that's interesting that some sociologists in 1971 said the whole thing that we need to do, the only thing that makes research publishable or interesting is having it challenge assumptions. And the better, the more deeply held those assumptions are, the better, because people are going to be more surprised by it. They're going to find it more interesting. And so I think that
well, it should also be true.
it should be true. Yeah, it should be true. And it is true because I did run the studies. I know that the studies.
No, I'm talking about the backlash.
Backlash, yeah.
Published,
well, the backlash is interesting.
So it's the backlash
because
that shows the
ideology. Yeah. And so to me, one of the takeaways that I had from this is that I didn't expect mindfulness to be a political topic. It feels very political.
Exactly.
Like I'd expect like gender or like, like distribution of resources to different classes. Those are clearly, obviously political topics. But mindfulness to me I didn't think people would have such strong identification with it as something that they had to defend. And I was wrong. I was wrong because I saw it. I intentionally didn't go to meditation retreats because I didn't want to identify with it because I wanted to be able to have enough distance from it to study as a scientist. But the deeper you get into it, and that's one of their.
You wanted to treat it as amic, but people wanted you to treat it as epic.
Yes, they did. They did, and they were really mad when I did. So that answer your question? I know. For
one later.
For one layer. Well, the part of well, I had a lot of cognitive dissonance when this happened because I still think mindfulness is more good than bad. And it felt like I was going against what the big picture feeling I agreed with was that it's a mostly good thing that most people could benefit from sometimes. It'd be a good tool for people to have in their toolbox. And it seemed like I was going against many people I, in general, agreed with and respected. And so I was uncomfortable with that. I was like, uh-oh, am I doing something bad? To be like sharing these actual real research findings, am I still doing something bad because it goes against the agenda or the cause, going against the cause? But then once I kind of calmed myself down from that, I was kind of like, but like, why are they so sensitive? And because these tasks are pretty stupid, right? These are not like, oh, are you a good parent? Like these are stupid little lab tasks that like if you're better or worse than them or motivated or not, who cares? So maybe it's my own fault for over claiming, like when I get this stupid effect to make bigger claims in the media than really it is. So maybe that's part of what's going on. Yeah.
A question on the type of treatments.
Yes.
So you have these treatments, you have the neutral condition, which is kind of for control. But what about other treatments that could be very similar to this type of thing, which is, listening to classical music for 3 minutes or.
So that was a Francesco Squarra question at one point, and we added a condition with Mozart music and it didn't clearly, it ended up usually being somewhere in the middle, where it was often similar to it was often either the middle or closer to the control condition than to the mindfulness. It didn't have, maybe it put people in the present moment, but not as well because they would mind wander away from it because the music, like it would just be going on in the background and then their mind would wander away from it after a while. And it doesn't have the non-judgment aspect of like someone telling you not to judge yourself. So I think there are similarities, like on a spectrum that would be closer to mindfulness than to a lot of other things where like you're really distracted, but it's not, we empirically it didn't feel like the same thing when we did try, but we didn't try that many times. I think we tried once.
And I think exactly. No, just follow. I feel that it's very difficult to take away anything very normative from this type of research because there's always a lot of things that I can do with those 15 minutes. It's very difficult to compare all alternatives that I have. And well, so should I actually mindfully meditate or not?
So that's the best response to that. Which isn't from my research. It's from, what's her first name? It's Fritz. What's Fritz's first name? She came here. She gave a talk here. Anyway, Fritz Lamb and Spreitzer have this Academy of Management
Perspectives article in 2011 where they surveyed people on what activities they did during their breaks at work, and they came up with 22 different activities. And the only activity that was positively correlated with their subjective vitality or how energized they felt was meditation out of those 22, the only one. And so that to me is one of the reasons I think like there are valid reasons to consider this as possibly the best in terms of how in terms of well-being. But that's not an intervention-based paper. It was more just descriptive paper looking at what people do and what's it correlated with. In any cross-sectional study, it could be, you know, a million other third lurking variables that are kind of influencing the variance in both of the two variables of interest. So, I mean, I wouldn't hang my hat on that as a total conclusion, but it's suggestive that there may be something there. Yes.
In the test performance paper, what kind of tests did you give them?
So we gave them anagram word puzzles. We gave them editing a cover letter to help someone get a summer job, to like find the grammatical mistakes and rewrite this to make it more effective. There's one other one that we had. Oh yeah, copying the text from the iTunes terms and conditions. That was like the most aversive task I could come up with. So it was copying this, they had 2 minutes to copy as many words as they could from the cookies and other technologies section of the iTunes. So I initially thought like, if we're ever gonna get this effect, it's gonna be for really unpleasant tasks. So that was the heaviest hammer, was the iTunes text copying one. And we definitely got that one.
All right, so that's a good leap way into my question.
Yeah.
You said unpleasant.
Yes.
Because I was thinking, could mindfulness essentially be putting people into a lazy mode, in the sense that it puts them in a non-problem solving mindset? Almost like you're getting me to focus on the present. There is no problem happening in the present. You're essentially guiding me not to worry about my ruminations of the past. There are problems there. I don't need to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting me not to worry about my anxiety about the future. Yeah, there are problems there. I don't need to go there. And essentially, you're getting me into a condition that is so pleasant. It's so worry-free that the status quo is better than anything else. Why am I going to do word filling tests and sentences and this and that?
Mm-hmm.
However, if you were to tell people, hey, are you excited to go to the next room and have an ice cream? Then probably everybody, that would cancel your effect. It's not that people are not motivated to do anything. They're just motivated to keep the status quo because it might be so pleasant.
Because the alternatives sound worse right now.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That could be that's a valid alternative explanation that I can't outrule with the data I collected. So that could be another valid interpretation of what's going on here. That's kind of the mood maintenance interpretation. And so, but the reason I didn't go with that story is because empirically, so many in this room know that emotion is on a circumplex model from Russell 1980, where there's how positive or negative it is, and there's how high or low arousal, not sexual arousal, like energy it is. And when we looked at the mediators, the one that was a little bit better was the arousal. So that's why we landed on calmness as our mediator rather than positive negative. But I still think it was going in the diagonal. So the question is like, okay, could we have just replaced it with, negative affect, reducing negative affect instead of, and we probably could have gotten that, but the effect wouldn't have been quite strong. Yeah.
Jumping, because what you say is interesting. Like I was thinking, like just out of curiosity, do you know any study that follow longitudinally the health of people that meditate? Because there was a study, I think, that was showing that paranoid people are the ones that die less compared to others because they screen themselves more. They think they have something, so that
they catch their cancers earlier.
Very early.
Huh.
And made me think about probably there are some database available to check actually how preventive care works for mindfulness. They don't think about the future.
That's right.
About anxiety.
Yeah.
No?
I mean, and I had a similar thought once. I mean, of course, like this is an N of 1, but there's a very successful psychologist who made their career on talking about the benefits of positive affect, who died young from something that probably could have been caught earlier. And I had the same thought. It's like, oh, is positive affect really great for creativity, but not great for, keeping yourself alive when, yeah.
We can go back a few slides. So
where you have these arrows where you explain that performance could have added and this one.
Here, yeah.
I don't understand this. Do you assume to trace what is this more task focus being something that could explain the performance that does not go down? Is that you assume, or is it you manage to show somehow that this is
so in experimental psychology, you have your IV, independent variable, you have your DV, dependent variable, and you have a mediator. And so basically you're looking at whether these two are correlated and these two are correlated, and you do some complicated bootstrapping type simulation thing to see how strong that relationship is. And there is your C path of like how strong is the link between the IV and the DV, and then you have your C prime path of if you control for this mediator, how much weaker does it get? And what I'm saying here is that empirically, the mediator of task focus, we ask people 5 questions or 4 questions, like how focused were you on the task that you did earlier in the survey? And they tell us on a 1 to 5 scale, oh, I was totally focused, or I was totally distracted, and we reverse those. And what I'm saying here is that when you run a statistical test that accounts for the effect of the mediator, this indirect effect is significant. But this one is also significant. So there are 2 countervailing effects pulling in the opposite directions, which cancel each other out in terms of the DV. Does that make sense?
I see. I was wondering if you could actually try to isolate them and try to have a situation where it would not suffer the less motivation effect. This is something that they would for sure want to do to perform. I can imagine my students want to perform well in the exam, and then there I would see if the direct effect of meditation.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question in terms of the moderators, because I think this would not replicate if it's something people are so motivated to do that even when they're like, if I ask my son, like, oh, do you want to go to the Euro Cup final? And then I have him meditate, he still wants to go to the Euro Cup final.
But then you want to see the performance after, so
yeah, it has to be something he's actually going to be performing it. Yeah.
I think that would be a more solid result.
Yeah.
Other than 2 mediators.
Instead, other than what?
Than going through mediators like this.
Okay.
And I think that would be what people would like to know as well, right? This improves my performance.
Well, I think that
when he matters,
because these are tasks that don't matter, they're unpleasant. They're things that people could probably get distracted from easily, which may have helped us here because they're closer to the floor on focus in the first place. They're getting distracted easily, and the meditation helps them because there's a lot of room to get better on your focus when you're already pre-distracted. Right. But if it was a task that's really immersive, it was like, play this video game with like a VR headset that's like no one's going to get distracted from because there's so much sensory to keep you invested in it, I'm sure we wouldn't get this. So that's a good question of like, what is there specific about these tasks that is helping us do this that it might not happen in other places? So this paper was on how if you meditate, it makes you reduce all your negative emotions. We already knew that, right? But one of those emotions, so I mean, if you're angry and you're going to go yell at your boss when you shouldn't yell at your boss, then you probably should meditate and reduce your anger so you don't yell at your boss, right? But there are other negative emotions, and particularly guilt, that is socially functional. Guilt's socially functional where if you feel guilty, you try to fix the problem you caused, you try to learn from your mistake, you try to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. So guilt is probably a negative emotion that you don't want to reduce. If you want to figure out who's trustworthy, according to research by Taya Cohen at Carnegie Mellon, you want to look for people who are more guilt prone. You want them on your team because they're the kind of people who are going to be better teammate members. And so if you reduce all negative emotions, you also reduce guilt. And what we found is that when you reduce guilt through meditating, it also makes people less motivated to help others who they've harmed. So if people engage in wrongdoing, they feel like they need to repay those who they've harmed. But mindfulness reduces this. Mindfulness makes it kind of artificially reduces the guilt people feel, so they don't feel as motivated to fix the problems they've created. So this was another article that people thought it got more attention because it was negative about mindfulness, because people don't want to think mindfulness makes people darker. And so here's a BBC article about how mindfulness can make you a darker person. And somebody at the Washington Post read that and asked me if I wanted to have an op-ed at the Washington Post. And I beat my old record of the number of angry comments. I'm up to 587 on this one. So I went up from 295. The most entertaining of which was Down East Patriot, who said, Andrew's so worried about guilt, he should become a Catholic priest, which I guess is helpful career advice, but also probably drawing on some unfair stereotypes about Catholic priests. Okay, anyway, last but not least, this paper about mindfulness and its effect on negotiation. This paper was the second project I did after the first one, which was about reducing the sunk cost bias. And I myself committed the sunk cost bias by running 10 studies that mostly didn't find significant effect. But in general, this paper, a lot of the research on mindfulness negotiation finds benefits. But there's a theory paper that says this is going to be great, have a lot of benefits. There are two empirical research articles which found that mindfulness makes people better at negotiation in terms of claiming more value, grabbing more value for themselves, and creating more value with their counterparts. And so I thought we were just going to be the mediator people or the moderator people. We're gonna add a process, or there's an effect, a main effect here, mindfulness improving negotiation. We're just going to add to the story in a way that's kind of incremental. But we're going to do it because it's such an interesting effect. We want to explore why it's happening. So we thought we would replicate these findings and find that mindfulness would increase negotiation. We ran a study at the Wharton Behavioral Lab with, this very widely used negotiation simulation where the two people pretend they're negotiating in a situation where one is the job candidate and one is the recruiter trying to recruit someone for a job. And so they meditate before and then they do the negotiation, or one of them doesn't meditate or neither of them meditate. And so we have these 4 different kinds of groups where both meditated, neither meditated, only the job candidate meditated, only the recruiter. And in contrast to what we thought, we got the exact opposite, where the people who had meditated got much worse value for themselves. They negotiated substantially worse than the people who were in the control condition, almost 3 stars, p-value of 0.003. And this was shocking. Like I clicked the statistical software button and fell back in my chair when I found this result. And so I thought, that's fascinating. Let's run more studies to see why this happened. And then and for some reason, the action was where the recruiter had meditated and the job candidate had been in the control condition. This is where the effect showed up the most. And I have no good story for why that is. My best guess is if there's a high power person who seems really calm, people think I'm going to take advantage of this. This might not last too long. I don't know. But then we ran 9 more studies and we never found a significant effect again, which was me committing the sunk cost bias myself, because I probably should have given up after the 3rd try. But so here was the significant one. And so when you meta-analyze it all, there's a small total effect in that this diamond is not touching the 0 line. So there is a small total effect, barely, but it's at a Cohen's d effect size of 0.14, which if you read the papers by Jacob Cohen, you would know is smaller than 0.20, which is the line for it to be considered small. So it's smaller than small, very small effect. And then we looked at the effect on value creation in the subset of studies where there was value creation opportunities and there was no effect at all. This time, the very wide diamond did include 0, so there's no effect there. So we just published that in a 3rd-tier journal 2 weeks ago. But now that you've seen all of these projects, what's missing? I'm sure there's more than one thing missing, but what do you think I want you to take away as being missing based on what I've said so far?
In the abstract, there was something about longer periods of attention.
Yeah, so longer periods. Yeah, so the aspirin metaphor is missing. The idea that I notice I'm stressed, so I'm gonna meditate because I notice I'm stressed. I have a headache, so I take an aspirin when I notice I have a headache. In all the studies I've talked about so far, the Qualtrics computer software told them when to meditate, or the experimenter in the lab told them when to meditate. They didn't notice, oh, now I'm stressed, I'm going to use the meditation right now. So this is what's been missing. Did you have your hand up? Do you have something?
No. What I thought was also be missing. I don't take aspirin. I have headaches. I don't take aspirin. I take ibuprofen.
Okay.
And so my point here is we do eventually try to see if this thing works on some people or some traits of people and not on others. You know, this is male, female, or some psychological traits.
Well,
so general, like word.
The one thing that I've seen more than once in my data, because I do often have this data, but I tend to like mediators more than moderators. To me, I find them more interesting, but moderators are still important practically because, you know, if I'm really high on something that would make this useful for me, then maybe I should meditate. And if I'm really low on that thing, then maybe I should forget it. And the one that shows up more often is that people really high in conscientiousness. No. People really high in neuroticism. Mindfulness works better for them because they're very high in negative affectivity. They're very emotionally reactive. And so that mindfulness pulls them away from their default more. If someone's really low in neuroticism, the state of mindfulness is not too different from their day-to-day baseline default. But if you're really high in neuroticism, then you tend to see these effects being more strong.
And the other question before you move on, so is it possible ethically to, let's say, to trigger a stress condition? Ethically, can you do that?
Well, this gets into the risk profile of your IRB at your institution. So some of them are more sensitive about these kinds of things than others. My bigger issue with trying to induce stress in the lab is that I'm not comfortable doing it. It's like maybe I could get away with it in terms of the IRB, but I also feel like most participants are smart enough to know what you're doing, and then they're going to rebel. They're going to be like, oh, they're trying to stress me out. I'm going to just disengage. It's like they're trying to force me into this hole, and I'm not going to go. So for me, it's more the practical question because laboratory, I mean, it has limited effectiveness because it's divorced from reality, and sometimes you can create a journey in it that feels meaningful, but the more complicated a thing you try to do, the lower chance it's going to be successful. And I mostly put like trying to intentionally stress people out in the laboratory in this category of like stuff that's probably just not going to work. And so the reason I didn't go for it.
Maybe like there are many actually possibility on Qualtrics to induce a state of frustration through games, and then maybe you can link that to, for example, winning a bonus. So they don't disengage because they still want the bonus, but you can actually manipulate the level of frustration that they experience through the test.
That could work.
Be also ethically more acceptable.
That's true. That's a good idea. That's a good point. As long as it seems real to them, like it seems like a game that they could have won. All of them do lose, but it doesn't show. It's not a red flag in their mind of this is
intentional. There is the goal that they can still win the bonus, and in the end you defeat them by giving them the bonus anyway.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. The second issue that I run into when I try to like play that chess game in my mind of what I would do submitting a paper with a study like this is that, as you know, the management journals now are getting like more and more critical or doubtful about anything that's lab related. And so maybe 10 years ago, you could make the claim that like, oh, this stress is similar to the stress they have in the workplace, but I just feel like they care so much about context these days that it's harder to convince them. But yeah, that is a good thing that maybe we should try. The reason I haven't been able to run this study is mostly a practical kind of lack of convenience issue where I go to companies and beg them for studies where they'll let me randomly assign their employees to meditate a couple times a week when they're stressed out and fill out a bunch of surveys. And then I want their supervisors to fill out surveys, and the companies meet with me once or twice and then they ghost me. They just stop responding because they're like, oh, I don't think there's anything in it for me. And this seems like I might have to talk to the legal department. I don't like to talk to the legal department. But so I'll give them these presentations. In some cases, I made like a 15-minute YouTube video about all the things I wanted in a study. And then eventually they ghost me. I'll say like, oh, I want this, the conditions here and blah, blah, blah. I give all these materials and they're just like, nope. So my department colleague, another professor in my department, Chris Barnes, who's really productive. He's the best researcher in our department. He had been doing research with a professor at Shanghai Jiao Tong University, Wen Wu, and Wen was like, hey, I want to do another project. Do you have any other studies you need? And Chris, I guess, had too much data at the time and was like, not really, but Andy, you were complaining about how you couldn't get the study for 10 years. Do you want to work with them? And so he pitches them to me. So I have a meeting with Wen, and I talk for 30 minutes about all the things I want in this study, expecting him to like say, oh, okay, too hard, sorry. And he's just like, okay. So I have another meeting with him. I asked for another like 30 minutes of like everything I'd ever want to study. And he's like, okay. And he just ran it. So him and his PhD student and 5 research assistants translated all the materials in Chinese, got access to a construction company in China that has 40,000 employees, and got 466 of the workers there and their supervisors to be in this study. And so now I'm going to be sharing some of the results from this study we finally were able to run with Wen Wu and Eric, his PhD student. So the research question that guided this project was whether mindfulness can improve work performance in the real world in businesses and workplaces. And if you read the management or mindfulness literatures, you see a lot of theory papers of people beautifully, elegantly talking about all the reasons why mindfulness should improve people's performance. But if you read the empirical articles, you don't find anything where they actually causally increase performance with any kind of random assignment, experimental intervention, manipulation. The only things you find are cross-sectional correlational studies where they see someone who was higher on trait mindfulness that they just measured once at the beginning tended to be more productive, usually in a really high stress job, like a restaurant waiter, like a high paced, stressful job under some conditions. And so again, anytime you would just have correlational studies, it could be a lot of different things really going on. And I told you already that in my paper, we found no effect of mindfulness on task performance. So task performance is similar to the workplace because 2/3 of people in the workplace say they're disengaged in every Gallup survey, then that's not super promising that mindfulness is going to improve work performance. So are the theory papers all wrong talking about these benefits? Are researchers failing to detect real benefits that are there? They just haven't figured out how to measure them or catch them. And so what I thought, as you probably could have guessed by now, is that maybe the issue is people are not meditating when they're stressed out at the workplace. What if we made it so that they're meditating when they feel stress instead of they're meditating at night when they're not stressed and they're not at work? Maybe we'd start to find effects. So that's what we tried in the study. And the mediator, the reason why we thought this would work, that mindfulness would increase work performance, is locus of control, where we thought that if people feel in control of their mental life, they have this tool to reduce their worst psychological states, then maybe they'll feel more in control in their outer life. So we thought mindfulness makes the people feel powerful. Maybe it's going to make them feel more powerful outside too, not just more powerful inside. And that will go on to make them perform better because they have a self-serving prophecy. They think, okay, if I put in effort, I'm going to perform better. And if I perform better, I'm going to get rewards I like. So this is the Vroom's expectancy theory, which is a really kind of prominent motivational theory. And it's based on these 3 linkages. It's about whether people believe, if I work hard, am I going to perform better? If I perform better, is the organization going to reward me? And for the rewards I would get, are they rewards I value or not? Are they going to fulfill my individual goals or not? I don't think mindfulness is going to change this. The rewards, if you get them, are still going to be the same. But I think it can change what people believe about whether their effort is going to lead to better performance and whether that performance is going to lead to rewards or not. So I think it makes people feel like the world is a little more meritocratic, or it's a little more in their control to get the life outcomes that they want. And so our first hypothesis is that mindfulness is going to make people have a more internal locus of control. So this is the A path here compared to the comparison participants. And then mindfulness will improve task performance in terms of our two measures of task performance. One is global task performance, and the other is customer service quality, because all of these employees are customer facing in some way. Then we also measured civility, largely because there's this theory paper by Bergeron who says, look, if you're too nice to people and you go around doing people favors, it's going to distract you from your core work tasks, and then you're going to get worse evaluations for your actual work. And we thought, well, you know, maybe that could happen. So, and it would kind of hurt our story in terms of suggesting people meditate if it does happen. So we're kind of hoping it didn't happen. We thought that if you believe that you're in control in terms of locus of control, you think that if I treat people well, it's going to come back to me. You believe in karma a little bit more if you have a very high internal locus of control. You think good stuff's going to come back to me, similar to Adam Grant's very popular book, Give and Take. And so we wanted to know if it came to the expense of civility. So our last two hypotheses for now are that on-the-spot mindfulness would enhance civility in both our measures of civility, so increasing helping behaviors and decreasing counterproductive workplace behaviors. And then this is just the mediation hypothesis of it being through increased internal locus of control. So here's the very simple theoretical model. On-the-spot mindfulness makes people have more of an internal locus of control, which goes on to improve performance and also improve civility, which in the case of counterproductive work behaviors means reducing it less. So big company in China, that's a construction company. There are over 40,000 employees, and we randomly sampled them. So he randomly messaged people to come to the study from a bunch of different departments, which is a stronger design than you normally see, because people will usually be like, oh, we put these two locations in this condition and these two locations, but we really grab people from a bunch of different locations, a bunch of different departments, for example. And we ended up with 466 employees across 4 conditions. This was a 55% response rate from the initial surveys. And we had random sampling, largely with pen and paper surveys that they either did in person when at the beginning or that were mailed to them and mailed back. And we gave them the conditions using thumb drives or on WeChat. So they had to have a meditation recording. And if they were physically there, then put it on the thumb drive onto their computer so they could listen to it later. And most of their roles had something to do with engineering. They were cost engineer, constructor, safety engineer, plumbing engineer. And this company makes office buildings and train stations and subways, and also creates some of the software that makes the train stations work. So here are our manipulations where we said, in this study for the next 4 weeks, we would like you to notice when you feel very stressed out at work and take a short break to engage in one of the 2 meditations if you're in the meditation condition. So for example, focused breathing meditation using guided recordings. While the frequency that you do this is up to you and how often you feel highly stressed, we envision that you may do it 2 to 3 times per week. This is not an everyday practice at the same time. We are asking that you do this exercise in the specific situations where you feel highly stressed and overwhelmed. Then in the therapeutic writing condition, which is the active control condition, we said the same thing, but instead of when you're stressed out, you should meditate, we say when you're stressed out, you should engage in therapeutic writing using writing prompts that we gave them. We said, like, here are the 4 prompts you should write about, like something you're avoiding, something that's been bothering you, etc. And then the no treatment control condition, and these are common, even though they're weak, they're common in mindfulness literature. They had no intervention at all, but they filled out all the survey questions. So the measures we had at the 4-week mark, we had the manipulation checks of anxiety, depression, and stress. We had the mediator of internal locus of control, and then our final dependent variables were 8 weeks later, and they were rated by the supervisors. So the supervisors were the ones who rated their performance and their civility in terms of global work performance, customer service quality, helping behaviors, and counterproductive workplace behaviors, which is basically just how much you screw other people over. So here are the results of the manipulation checks. And it's mostly what you'd expect, with the exception of this therapeutic writing control increasing stress. So this is a really common well-being intervention with a lot of articles written on it by James Pennebaker at the University of Texas, Austin. So I was a little surprised that the people who did this well-being intervention for 4 weeks actually reported more stress than the no treatment control. But otherwise, and I don't think these are significantly different, the anxiety between loving kindness and therapeutic writing. But then here's the mediator results. And I'm going to remind you of the theoretical model. There are really 16 main effects we care about, because there are 2 conditions of meditation. There's focused breathing and loving kindness. And then there are two control conditions, therapeutic writing and no treatment. So we care about focused breathing versus therapeutic writing, loving kindness versus therapeutic writing, focused breathing versus no treatment, loving kindness versus no treatment. So there are 4 main effects we care about. And then there are 4 different dependent variables: work performance, customer service quality, helping behaviors, counterproductive work behaviors. So there's 16 effects that we care about, 4 times 4. And all of the main effects were significant except for one, which was focused breathing versus therapeutic writing on work performance. So focused breathing, the first and the third nodules here between on the blue, focused breathing versus therapeutic writing. Everything else was statistically significant in the expected direction. Again, therapeutic writing is a little bit entertaining in the sense that they are reducing helping behaviors compared to the no treatment control. So there seems to be something about writing about all the problems in your life that makes you self-focused and kind of like, oh, woe is me, doesn't make you want to go out and help other people because you feel bad about yourself. So I actually stopped journaling as much after I saw this data because I thought, uh-oh, maybe I should just like go out and do stuff if I'm feeling bad instead of just like wallowing in my self-pity. And mediation, we got 13 of the 16 statistically significant mediators flowing through internal locus of control as the mediator. I don't have a good story for why it was the 13 and not the other 3. But so we started submitting these to journals, and you know, when you submit to journals, reality hits you right in the face, and so we started getting rejections. Org Science wanted us to pre-register our field experiments, so I thought that was just something you do for lab experiments that are really easy to run the next one tomorrow, but no, if you spend 5 months on the field experiment, they want that pre-registered too now. So I ran another study online, which is just these one-shot mindfulness studies that I pre-registered in case this is a box they want me to check. And I didn't think that if I ran a study with mindfulness and task performance that it was going to work, because I already ran 14 of those in the other paper that didn't work. And the civility effect is not novel in terms of these short-term meditations. I already published another paper on that. So I thought, well, what else is there to say that I could capture in a one-shot study? And I thought, well, the connection between mindfulness and locus of control feels kind of distant. So it might be good to try to figure out why can these be linked? And what I came up with, the story I've always talked was power, but I never measured how powerful people feel. So I thought, well, let's run a study just to see if there's a link between mindfulness and locus of control through power, how powerful people feel. So here are the new hypotheses. State mindfulness induced via meditation will make participants feel they have more power compared to the control condition, and increased felt power will mediate the relationship between state mindfulness induction and internal locus of control. So ran this study on Prolific, nearly 200 participants, randomly assigned to the mindfulness meditation or mind wandering 15-minute recording. They reported how powerful they felt at the moment with questions like, how powerful do you feel right now? How satisfied are you right now with the amount of resources you control? How satisfied are you right now with the amount of power you have? I feel personally satisfied with the sense of control I have. And then we showed them a ladder with 10 different rungs on it. And we said, which ladder do you feel like, which rung of the ladder do you feel you're on compared to other people in the area where you live in your community? And then we measured locus of control with the same measure we used in the other paper. And we got a significant main effect of the IV of mindfulness on the mediator of state power. So people who meditated did stay, they felt more powerful than people who didn't meditate. Unfortunately, but not too surprisingly, if we're being honest, we didn't get a main effect on the DV of locus of control. So that was in the right direction, but it was only P equals 0.28. But the indirect effect was significant. So from mindfulness to locus of control through state power, there was a significant indirect effect. So this is suggestive that if and when there is a link between mindfulness and locus of control, that it would flow through people feeling more powerful. So contributions, this is the first causal evidence of mindfulness increasing work performance. There's more support for this consensus that mindfulness increases civility. Locus of control is usually really hard to change. So if you look at the other articles in the literature and what changes people's locus of control, it's like they have several years longer tenure in their work, or they get a promotion. It's like stuff that's big, stuff that takes a lot of time. It's dependent on other people. It's complicated. It takes a lot more effort than just meditating for 30 minutes per week for 4 weeks. So this is a much simpler way to change locus of control than anything I've seen in the literature. that takes less time. And then there's research on micro breaks, which are just the breaks people take in the workplace. And it's usually pretty blunt. And we're saying, well, maybe people should consider the specific emotional state people are in and match it with the appropriate micro break, in this case, meditation. And this is the first paper to ever look at mindfulness increasing subjective power, which is probably also important because power is very, very well studied in the management and psychology literature. So this could open up a lot of other things, a lot of other kind of downstream outcomes that people might care about. Yeah.
Okay, did you think about unpacking the definition of power? Because one thing is feeling powerful over yourself, and the other powerful over others. But like the way in which it was actually personalized their power, there is both of them. There's kind of like a certain line, and you may find actually diverging results there.
I might. That's a good question. I mean, I intentionally wanted them together to make it feel more generalizable, but it's not a bad question in terms of like, if you look at the item level, or if I tried to make 5 on each of them, which of them would work?
I mean, it becomes interesting because one probably would have more on locus of control.
Yeah.
Power.
Yeah.
And power over others, it might be lower because I mean, like
because it didn't change. Yeah, that makes sense. That could be true. That could happen. So then back to the rejection list. Back to my emotional support journal rejections. So here is a rejection from ASQ where they're basically saying, even though no one has shown a causal effect of mindfulness on performance, we already have these 8 theory papers you cited. So everyone already thinks that what you're showing is true based on the theory papers. So you're not making a theoretical contribution as much as you're making just an empirical contribution. So we're rejecting the paper. And here's another one basically saying the same thing. They're saying, while you argue that the supporting evidence on the relationship between mindfulness and performance has been scant, there's this existing research that's shown a positive relationship, which are the cross-sectional studies with no random assignment to conditions, one of which they misspelled the person's last name of. And so this is, again, like a lesson for me is that even if what you are showing is technically new, if your audience doesn't feel like it's new, perception is reality. So this was kind of a rude awakening for me. And I went back to the data and I was like, well, what other effects do we have in here that people don't think is true already? And what I came up with was that mindfulness increases voice behaviors. And so here's the second paper out of this data set on mindfulness increasing voice behaviors. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to show you the results of the 2 studies. Yeah.
What about exploring the mediators of these relationships? You have data to show.
We have a lot of mediators, and
because that could be a novel theoretical solution.
Yeah, but I mean, the top journals have top journals receive so many submissions that they have somewhere between like a 4 and 7% acceptance rate.
Yeah, no, I mean, ASQ would never.
They'll never go
collections.
Yeah.
But maybe.
But I mean, AMJ wouldn't either. I mean, I don't think any of them would, to be honest. And unless you really blast them over the head with 6 field studies or something, and they're like, well, the data is just so strong that even though it's incremental, you're just adding a mediator, we're going to give it to them just because they've jumped through all our hoops. But like in general, the glory goes to the main effect people. You want to be the people who found the effect of the IV on the DV. You don't want to, like we were going to do with the negotiation paper, we shouldn't have done, we should have known better. But we wanted to see, oh, they already showed mindfulness increased negotiation performance. Let's just add a mediator. That doesn't get you into top journals unless you're very, very lucky. So because we do have the new mediator with locus of control. And we do say it's a contribution, but they're like, nice try. So this other one on voice. Voice is basically when you notice something's going wrong in the workplace, do you speak up or do you stay silent? And we found that mindfulness in this vignette study, people said that they would speak up more if they just meditated than if they were in the mind wandering control, or marginally different, marginally higher than if they were in a web surfing comparison condition. And then this was mediated by an increase in positive emotion or positive affect and increase in their risk tolerance. So people are in a better mood, they're more willing to take on risk, And that leads them to voicing or saying they voice their concerns because that's a risky thing. You don't know if the people around you are going to get really mad at you for the suggestion. Yeah.
Well, what you just presented me makes me wonder about whether subjective power might be there too.
It might. It might.
We measured that with Samantha.
Yeah.
We collect data over.
Yeah.
And we didn't find that. It was like what we thought with like
yeah.
Jinshan and
yeah. And that, I mean, the one I showed you took at least 2 tries, maybe 3 tries with different measures. So I think that I should check. So I haven't run a study with state power and voice in the same study. So that could be another mediator that could work. That could be another mediator that could work. So then like the data from the big field experiment looks like this, where in the mindfulness condition, they say that they actually, this is a supervisor rating. So the supervisors say that the people who, they don't even know they're in different conditions, but the people who were in the mindfulness condition, their supervisors say that they engaged in more voice, that they spoke up more over the last 8 weeks, both in terms of promotive voice, which is like suggesting solutions, and prohibitive voice, which is just pointing out problems. So both of them were higher in the focused breathing condition than in the therapeutic brain no treatment control. And the mediator, this same mediation model also replicated, which honestly was, I made this study because I knew it worked in this. And so that's why I didn't like run the online study before the field experiment. But in terms of the story, the field experiment's going to be the second thing in the paper.
And out of curiosity, how do you explain the negative effect, the positive effect on the voice? Because positive effect increase this tolerance that increase voice, but as a negative effect.
I don't know. And it might be kind of like the mindfulness with there's probably a lurking variable here that's pulling it in the opposite direction. There's probably some suppressor variable where it's like positive affect increases risk tolerance, increases voice. There's something else that's pulling this down. But yeah, this is weird. I don't have a good story for that. So any other questions that you haven't already voiced before I get to my cautionary tales? Okay, let's get to my cautionary tales. So if I could have done it all again, I wish I'd done a single paper dissertation, because maybe I would have moved on to newer and better ideas instead of trying to publish all 5 of these papers for the last 13 years. If you have a project, your dissertation or another project that begs a specific study type, like a field experiment, try harder than I did to actually get that type of study instead of just doing other things that tangentially get at your research question. And what makes research interesting is that it challenges assumptions. Even if an effect has not been exactly shown, if people already think it's true based on the literature, it's going to be an uphill battle for you to publish that article. So you don't just say, oh, this is new in a narrow sense. If you step back, is this surprising to most people? Should be the bar to guide yourself, would be my advice based on hitting my head against the wall on this one. Seems like people fill out your study in China more often than Americans will, but their online panel called Credimo is a lot worse than the ones we're used to with Prolific Turk. Like it took a month to get 200 participants on our pilot. The biggest mistake I made is I never measured how many times participants meditated in the big field experiment. That was my biggest mistake, and it's potentially a fatal flaw. And the reason I made that decision is I didn't want the people in the control conditions to know this is a meditation study. And so I wanted to just triangulate at that by asking them about anxiety, stress, and depression, which we know is very strongly linked to meditation and mindfulness. But what I would have done if I could do this again is I would have asked them about 20 different activities, one of which was meditation, so that I get the measure of how much they meditated without it revealing to them that this is all about meditation. So that's what I would have done. Hindsight's 2020. I also wish I had a long-term mindfulness control condition where we ask people to meditate every day for 45 minutes. And because the claims I want to make sometimes are, if you meditate like the aspirin, it's more effective than the muscle metaphor. But I can't really support that with the data because we don't have another active meditation condition where people meditate every day for 45 minutes. Everyone wants pre-registration for everything now. Maybe you can get away with doing a qualitative study without pre-registration, but I think anything else, you're going to get at least one reviewer saying, did you pre-register this? Why not? Rerun the study with pre-registration. Field studies, if you run a study on MTurk or on Prolific and it doesn't work, or you made a mistake, you can be like, oh, well, let's just throw more money at it tomorrow, run another study. But if you make a mistake, like I did, of not measuring how many times they meditated in a field experiment, well, you have to find a new company, which might take 10 years if current trends continue. And it's going to take 5 months of, actually running the study. So you really want to front load your efforts with these big data collection, because you really have to, there's really no going back.
Sorry, quick question. You didn't measure the ones that were treated or the untreated ones?
I didn't measure how many times anyone meditated.
Anyone, okay. And you suggest 2-3 times?
Yes, I suggested 2 or 3 times a week, but I also told them it should be based on how often you feel highly stressed. We imagine it might be 2 or 3 times a week, but it's really up to you based on your own stress levels. And then, so one thing I've also been surprised by is that I feel like 10 years ago, a big field experiment like this would have been enough for a publication. But now the journals want 2 or 3 studies, even if one of your studies is this big. So that would be something that I would try to get before submitting to journals in the first place. Because the performance manuscript's been rejected at ASQ, AMJ, JP. It has a reject and resubmit at Organization Science, so it's under 2nd round review. But like the 1st round was a reject and resubmit, so maybe it's like 1.2 round review or something. The voice manuscript's already been rejected at AMJ, but the feedback is really good. And the reason I submitted it to AMJ was more to get feedback so I could make it good to get into a different journal. Because one of my colleagues, who's ironically an AE right now at AMJ, she told me that she does this where she knows it's not going to get in the first journal she submits it to, but she knows the feedback's going to be really good. So then she actually changes a lot based on the feedback and submits it somewhere that she actually thinks that it can fit. Okay, well, that's all I had today. So thanks a lot for coming. And it's a pleasure to see you all again. And let me know if you have any other questions or comments. Do you have any of them?
Sorry. Let's just talk about this on-the-spot intervention, the very logic of it. So I once heard this line saying, if you cannot meditate for 15 minutes, you should meditate for an hour. Yeah. And so my point is, can you really think, because I know what it is to take a pill, I know it's going to benefit, but I'm highly stressed. Am I going to waste even more time to do this meditation? And I suppose that maybe your guys there, when they're really, really stressed, they're not going to do it because they just find so the very logic of intervention.
Counterintuitive and possibly hard to implement. Yeah.
You have to implement in a job place or in an experiment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. So we are definitely swimming against the current in what we're telling people to do. I mean, the reason I still think it's worth telling people to do it is because often that's when we make mistakes. Like that's when we snap at someone who really didn't cause the problem. Like that's when.
But in terms of measuring the effect, don't you think you should be kind of get to know if they really did at the right moment or they skipped at the moment, because that's what you want to measure, right?
Yes.
Say, like, right, really, am I really sure that they did that when they should?
So we didn't have any counts, but if we're going to have the count, the best count would be of the times you were highly stressed, how often did you do this? Yeah, that would be the best. That would be the best manipulation check. That's a good one. Anna Koshta's hand was up. Is there a way for us to hear what she wanted to say, or?
Hi, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I was just wondering about your main effect story about because it seems that to me, looking at counterfactual might help get your story across in the sense that mindfulness should improve performance through some sort of reduction of negative effect or improvement of positive effect, but compared to what? Right? There's a lot of literature showing that a moderate amount of negative effect actually gets job done or actually helps people progress in their career. So maybe you could make your story stronger by just showing whether mindfulness can outperform the other status quo's way by which people improve performance or improve improve their career path or whatever. That was one question or more suggestion. And another one would be, especially with field experiments, whether you could consider more objective measures. I know that from somebody that comes from the lab, this is a bit awkward, but more objective measures of your dependent variables, like rather than have people or supervisors saying that somebody performed better, but just have objective measures of their performance improvement, something that you could externally measure, because that might actually make a difference. And you mentioned that you didn't measure how many times people meditate, but they did have an app to do that. So can you not get data from the app service providers on how often they log in?
We gave them a recording we told them to listen to. So there's no way that we would be able to track from our side how many times they actually listen to that recording. Like if I give you a Britney Spears song and put it on your smartphone, like there's no way for me to tell how many times you open the Britney Spears song.
Okay, that's a pity. But can you say something about this idea of comparing things with kind of like with something else that?
Well, that was kind of where we're coming from with therapeutic writing, because that is a well-established well-being intervention in and of itself.
But that was exactly my point. You're focusing on something that improves people's well-being. And I was wondering about comparing that with something that, albeit it does not improve people's well-being, or might even, something like that induces negative effect, on whether mindfulness would outperform in terms of the end goal, in terms of increasing performance. Because the idea is that you require positive effect to be better or to perform better at what you do. And there's literature that shows that, negative effect and other negative emotions might actually, at least in the short term, because the thing is that you're focusing on individual benefits having organizational benefits. And that might not always be the case. Sometimes something that is negative for the individual might increase performance at organizational level and vice versa.
Amazon.
The discussion of whether that's ideal or should be promoted, that's another discussion. But just for the sake of showing that, of finding an effect, because you said, well, maybe the effect is too small, right? So that might be because you're not comparing it to something different. It was just a thought. Thank you.
That's a good point. And I mean, I wish, it's just been so hard to get any data in the real world at a company. It's been so hard to get this field experiment access at all, that like I would love if I could, get 10 field experiments with different types of companies with different types of tasks, and I could get salespeople and have like the objective measure of how much they sold. I would love that. I would love that. That's a great idea. It's just the challenge for me is getting anything at all at this point. So maybe if I get famous and, Fortune 500 companies start calling me saying, hey, how can we work with you? Name what you want. Like that. I think that's kind of how Adam Grant managed to get so many field experiments, is like they go do exec ed. They take his exec ed class at Wharton and he impresses them in the classroom. And then they're like, okay, whatever you want. And so if that's the situation, then I think you can answer these kinds of questions really rigorously. For the rest of us, it seems really hard to get that kind of access.
I think that's probably the organizations that would most likely want to help you. Things like organizations that focus on well-being and doing good. There are a couple of those. I don't know if you know this book called Homo Prospectus.
I don't know that book.
Okay, it was supported by an organization that focused on doing well, let's say, or doing good. But I'm not sure whether you find you need to find an organization that is impartial enough to then accept that maybe you don't find something that aligns with their. So they could be willing to support to fund your research or somebody's research, but they need to be enough open to accept that you might find something that goes against their beliefs or their agenda. That's a tricky part. But the book
I did do myself a favor at getting access by publishing negative effects. So some of the countries, some of the companies that really like mindfulness see me as a villain. And so that that may have closed some doors that may have been halfway open in the past as well. I don't know. But thank you for your thoughts. These are really helpful. Maybe
no worries. I hope you get out of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else? Thanks so much.
I think the students would be a revolution if you try it with the students before the exams.
See, I mean, I feel like that you get into the point that some of you have alluded to of like, and that you've alluded to of, okay, students are already procrastinating. And so if they're going to study for 3 hours right before the exam, is that really the best part for them to take out of those 3 hours, the 15 minutes to meditate? Because is that a case? So the guiding question and what I want people to take away from my research stream is that mindfulness is not a magic wand that fixes everything. Mindfulness is a specific thing that makes you calmer, feel less negative emotions, focus less on the past and future and more on the present. And, you know, Anna, you're alluding to the literature on all these benefits of negative emotions. And so it'd be really easy to take mindfulness, look at the review articles by Joseph Forgas and find, you know, 10 more papers worth of effects of how mindfulness is going to reduce something good, because we already know that negative emotion creates these good things in some of these papers, and mindfulness reduces negative emotion. Like it's not rocket science to make these connections that people haven't made yet. And that's partly, I think, a vestige of how so many people in the mindfulness literature identify with it and don't want to admit when it's not working. They think, oh, that must be a fluke. I don't believe it. And they just throw it in the garbage. And I'm willing to take it out of the garbage and be like, okay, let's publish it. I think I just want people to see this as a specific tool that is often helpful. It's usually helpful to make you feel better, but the contingencies of when it makes you actually perform better are more complicated, and we don't know them yet. And I want to continue to figure out what those contingencies are. Thank you so much.
If anybody wants to join us for snacks in the third floor, third.
Good to see you.